My brother said I was adopted to steal my share. DNA Day ended him. And it's my real-life story, and I would like to share this to everyone for their life lesson. So, my name is Robert Green, and I am 53 years old. I never imagined that a single conversation, a few careless words spoken by someone I trusted all my life, could shake the very foundations of everything I believed about my family, my past, and even myself. Yet that day, under the bright, almost cruelly cheerful sunlight filtering through the living room windows, my world was turned upside down. I was sitting there in the worn leather armchair that had been my dad's favorite, staring at Jason, my younger brother, who had always been a bit impulsive, a bit reckless, but never, I thought, capable of something so calculated. We were supposed to have a simple discussion, nothing more than the mundane task of sorting out details about Dad's estate, dividing assets, figuring out what went to whom. I thought it would be straightforward, maybe awkward, maybe tense for a moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the words that came next. Jason leaned back, his expression almost too calm for the words he was about to say. I could feel a cold shiver run down my spine as he locked eyes with me. His gaze was sharp, almost predatory, and then, in a tone that was casual but deadly in its delivery, he said it. He said that I was not truly a part of this family, that I was adopted, that I had no real claim to anything that Dad had worked his entire life to build. My mouth went dry and my heart began to race uncontrollably, hammering against my chest as if it were trying to escape. For a moment I could barely breathe. My own brother, my flesh and blood, was telling me I did not belong. I tried to make sense of it, to find some flaw in the sentence, some loophole that could make it all vanish like a cruel joke, but there was nothing. Jason was deadly serious. He continued, smirking now as though he had rehearsed this moment, as though he had been waiting years for the chance to drop this bomb. According to him, Dad had secretly adopted me as a baby, a supposedly noble act meant to protect me from some scandal that I had never even known existed. And now, years later, it was time, in his words, to correct the family balance and ensure that my share of the inheritance went to him instead. I could not believe it. My mind started racing, memories flashing in front of my eyes in disjointed fragments. I remembered Dad tucking me in at night, his hands rough but gentle, the way he celebrated my little victories and comforted my failures. I remembered family holidays, birthdays, the laughter and fights with Jason growing up. All of it suddenly felt tainted, as though the foundation of my entire life had been built on a lie. I sat there frozen, trying to comprehend the audacity, the cruelty, and the sheer impossibility of his words. For a brief moment the room seemed to shrink around me, the sunlight burning too bright, the air too thin. Anger bubbled up, raw and uncontrollable, threatening to spill out in a torrent of screams, accusations, and perhaps even blows. My hands shook slightly as I clenched them in my lap, trying to ground myself, trying to force my mind to slow down and think. I wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, to make him admit that he was lying. But deep down, some part of me knew this was not a moment for rage. It was a moment for clarity, for patience, for careful thought. A small voice inside me whispered, barely audible at first but growing stronger, telling me to wait. Not everything had to explode in anger. Not everything had to be destroyed in this instant of betrayal. There was a possibility, a small thread of hope, that Jason was wrong, that he had been misinformed, or that there was some misunderstanding that could be unraveled with facts. But facts would be needed, evidence that could not be denied. The thought of this filled me with a strange mixture of determination and dread. I realized in that moment that my life, my identity, and everything I had believed about my place in this family might depend on what I did next. So I made a decision, one that would set the course for months of investigation, confrontation, and, ultimately, vindication. I decided that I would find out the truth, no matter how painful or shocking it might be. I would not let Jason's words go unchallenged. I would not allow the seed of doubt he had planted to take root in my mind or in the minds of anyone else in my family. I needed proof, indisputable proof, something that could cut through the lies and manipulations, something that would reveal the truth in its raw and undeniable form. And as I sat there, my chest still tight with anger and disbelief, I felt a strange clarity. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with tension, emotional landmines, and the potential for heartbreak. But I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to face whatever truths awaited me. Whatever lay hidden in the shadows of our family history would soon come to light, and I would be there to see it. I grew up in a family where love was never something spoken aloud. It was always quiet, steady, and demonstrated through actions rather than words. My dad was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders without complaint, someone who worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk to make sure we never wanted for anything, even when it meant sacrificing his own comfort, his own rest, and sometimes even his own happiness. I remember how he would come home after long, grueling days, hands calloused and clothes smelling of the shop. Yet he would still take the time to ask about school, about my friends, and about Jason, who was the sort of child who could fill a room with his presence alone. Jason was always loud, always demanding attention, always moving, always speaking before thinking, and somehow, even in his chaos, he found ways to make people laugh and feel included. I, on the other hand, had always been quieter, content to linger in the background, to observe, to notice the little things others overlooked. And yet, in those subtle, almost unnoticed ways, my bond with both my father and Jason had always been strong. We were close, but not inseparable, not in the way that some siblings were who shared secrets and childhood adventures without hesitation. Still, the memories we shared were stitched into the fabric of my life, and thinking about them now, I could almost smell the summer air of those long afternoons in our backyard, hear the squeal of laughter as Jason and I chased each other in circles, and remember the way our fights over trivial things, a stolen baseball, a snatched toy, a careless insult, always ended in laughter or reconciliation, with Dad gently reminding us to stop, his voice firm but warm, guiding us without ever needing to shout. Mom passed away when I was still young, and her absence left a void so profound that Dad became not just a parent but my entire world. He was my anchor, my protector, the one constant in a life that suddenly felt fragile and incomplete. I could see now how every little gesture he made was his way of showing love, from staying up late to help me with school projects, to cheering louder than anyone else at my sports games, to letting me drive the old family car when I finally turned 16, even though I knew he had worried every second I was on the road. Those memories, once comforting, suddenly felt like both a balm and a knife in the heart, because Jason's words now cast a shadow over every recollection. Could it all have been a lie? Could it be that every hug, every word of encouragement, every proud smile had been nothing more than a performance, carefully staged to keep me in the dark? I replayed in my mind the day I graduated high school, the first job I landed, the small victories in life that Dad celebrated with quiet pride, and even the minor mishaps that Jason and I laughed about late at night, thinking nothing of the world outside our backyard. Now those moments felt fragile, like crystal that could shatter at any touch, because I had to consider the possibility that Jason's claim, that I was not truly a blood member of this family, was true, that perhaps he had spun stories over the years, planting seeds of doubt so that he could one day claim what he believed was his alone. The thought of it made my chest tighten, a deep ache settling there, because love and family are supposed to feel unshakable, permanent. Yet the idea that all of it might have been based on a lie was like discovering that the ground beneath my feet was sand and not solid earth. I couldn't reconcile the warmth of those memories with the cruelty of Jason's words, and I knew, in that moment, that understanding the truth would mean confronting not just him, but every hidden corner of our past, every whispered story, every shadowy family secret that had been kept from me all these years. A week later, we all gathered for Dad's birthday, a day that should have been filled with laughter, warmth, and the simple joy of family togetherness. But instead it became the stage for a confrontation that would haunt me for months to come. The house was buzzing with the familiar chatter of cousins, aunts, and family friends, the smell of Dad's favorite roast filling the air, and yet beneath the surface, a tension seemed to simmer that no one openly acknowledged. Dad had left instructions regarding his estate, not because he anticipated conflict, but because he was a man who planned for every possibility, a man who understood that life was unpredictable. I had always respected that about him, even admired it. But that day, Jason chose to weaponize those very instructions in a way I could never have imagined. In front of everyone, without warning or hesitation, he brought up my so-called adoption, and in his sharp, smug tone, he claimed that the documents Dad had left behind would confirm that I had no rightful claim to any part of the estate. His words were deliberate, each one designed to humiliate me, to isolate me emotionally, and to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of everyone present. I could feel the eyes of cousins and friends flicking toward me, some looking uncomfortable, others whispering among themselves, as if waiting for the drama to unfold. The room, once familiar and comforting, felt suddenly like a cage, every wall closing in, every friendly smile replaced with suspicion or uncertainty. It was then that I realized the truth of what Jason was attempting. He was trying to dismantle my place in this family, to sever me from the very roots I had grown up with, and to consolidate power over the legacy Dad had worked his entire life to build. I excused myself quietly, my hands trembling slightly as I closed the door behind me, shutting out the murmurs, the laughter, and the faint clinking of dishes in the kitchen. Alone in my room, I sank into the chair by the window, staring out at the fatting afternoon light, my mind racing in a way that made it almost impossible to breathe. I thought about Jason, his smirk, the confidence with which he had presented his argument, as though he had rehearsed it for months, as though he believed I could do nothing to challenge him. But even in the thick of anger, a small voice reminded me that he had no proof, nothing concrete beyond his own words and manipulations. Dad, if he were alive, would have never let this happen, I reminded myself. He would have seen through Jason's lies and ensured that I was protected. But Dad was not here, and the responsibility now rested squarely on my shoulders. I had to act, and I had to act decisively. There could be no hesitation, no impulse, only careful planning and unwavering determination. I began to formulate a plan, one that required patience, precision, and the courage to face truths that might be difficult to swallow. If I could obtain indisputable evidence of my bloodline, proof that would erase Jason's lies and restore my rightful place, then I could reclaim not just what was mine, but my sense of identity, my dignity, and my peace of mind. I knew it would not be easy. The journey would be filled with tension, confrontation, and emotional turbulence, but I felt a strange sense of clarity settle over me. For the first time since Jason's words hit me, I felt a spark of control in a situation that had seemed designed to strip me of it. I would find the truth, and when I did, I would expose every deception, every twisted manipulation, and make certain that Jason understood that nothing, not even the audacity of his lies, could take away what was rightfully mine. Sitting there by the window, watching the shadows stretch across the floor, I made a silent vow to myself. I would uncover the proof and I would see justice served, not through anger, but through truth, patience, and careful execution. The path ahead was uncertain, the challenges formidable, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not be silenced, I would not be pushed aside, and I would reclaim my place in the family, no matter the cost. The moment I stepped away from the chaos of Dad's birthday celebration, I knew I could not rely on memories, arguments, or family whispers to defend myself. If Jason was going to try to rewrite our family history, then I needed something concrete, something irrefutable that could not be twisted or denied. I began digging into every piece of our family history that I could find, starting with the documents that should have been routine, but suddenly felt like treasures hiding the truth. Birth certificates, school records, hospital files, anything that might shed light on the circumstances of my birth, any record that could confirm or refute Jason's outrageous claim. The more I dug, the more I realized how little I actually knew about the mechanics of my own early life, how much I had taken for granted, and how easy it could have been for someone to try and manipulate those gaps for their own gain. There were old letters tucked into drawers, faded photographs with dates scribbled in the corner, and stories Dad had told me when I was younger, all pieces of a puzzle that suddenly seemed more urgent than ever. Each page I turned, each document I scanned, seemed to intensify the anger simmering in my chest. I could feel Jason's betrayal stretching further than just me. It was an attempt to distort the memory of Dad, to poison the very foundation of our family. The thought of it made my hands shake, and yet it also fueled me with a determination that I had never known before. I knew I could not do this alone, so I reached out to a lawyer, someone professional, someone who could help me navigate the legal side of things without risking my credibility or leaving any loopholes for Jason to exploit. I explained everything, my voice tight with tension and suppressed anger, recounting his words, his smirk, the way he had tried to make the entire family question my legitimacy. The lawyer listened patiently, nodding occasionally, and then after I had laid everything bare, she gave me advice that would change the course of the fight entirely. She suggested a private DNA test, something indisputable, a scientific answer that could cut through the lies and the manipulation. She also warned me to document everything, to keep detailed records of every conversation, every step I took, so that if Jason tried to challenge me legally or socially, I would be ready. The weight of that advice settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak, but I welcomed it. At least now, I had a plan, a path forward through the fog of betrayal and confusion. When the DNA test kit finally arrived, I felt a strange and almost dizzying mix of emotions. Part of me was terrified, wondering if Jason's claims might somehow be true, questioning everything I had ever believed about myself and my family. Could it be possible that I had grown up all these years thinking I belonged somewhere I never actually did? Could I really be fighting for a claim for a place, for a legacy that was never mine to begin with? And yet another part of me, a stubborn, unyielding part, refused to give in to doubt. I carefully read the instructions almost obsessively, making sure I followed every step perfectly, and then I sent my sample off to the lab, sealing it with a sense of finality I had never felt in my life. The waiting period began, stretching out in what felt like an eternity. Every morning, I woke to the anxiety that maybe today would bring the answer, and every night, I went to bed with the tension of uncertainty pressing down on me like a weight I could not lift. Meanwhile, life outside my room went on, as if the world were oblivious to the storm brewing within me. Jason, of course, seemed completely at ease. I saw him laughing with cousins, telling stories to friends, acting as if the estate was already his, as if the victory he imagined was inevitable. Every time I caught a glimpse of him, smiling and confident, it drove a cold rage through me, a fire that I struggled to contain. My instincts screamed at me to lash out, to confront him, to demand justice immediately, but I knew I could not afford to lose my composure. I had to stay calm, to play the long game, to wait until I had the undeniable truth in my hands. The juxtaposition of his carefree arrogance and my tense, simmering focus made each day feel longer, heavier, and more excruciating. Every memory of our childhood, every moment of trust and love suddenly felt like stakes in a game I had never asked to play but now had no choice but to win. The betrayal was not just in the words he had spoken. It was in his confidence, his entitlement, his assumption that the truth could be bent to suit him. And yet, through the frustration, the anxiety, and the gnawing fear, a small but determined thought took root in my mind. I would wait. I would endure. And when the results came, the truth would be mine to wield, sharp, undeniable, and irreversible. The days that followed the sending of the DNA sample were some of the longest and most agonizing of my entire life. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each hour dragging behind the next, as if mocking the anticipation and anxiety that had taken residence inside me. I found myself replaying every single memory of my life over and over, examining them as if through a magnifying glass, searching for clues I had previously overlooked. Every photo on the walls, every old family album that had been gathering dust in the attic, every faded snapshot of birthdays, holidays, and simple afternoons spent in the backyard suddenly took on new significance. I scrutinized the way Dad had looked at me in pictures, the way he had smiled or held me, trying to see if there had ever been any hint that Jason's words could be true. Even the smallest stories that had once seemed inconsequential, conversations about school, jokes about my habits, the way I preferred quiet while Jason thrived in chaos, became pieces of a puzzle I desperately wanted to solve. I began to remember subtle remarks Jason had made over the years, casual comments about my appearance or temperament that now seemed pointed, deliberate, almost like he had been planting seeds of doubt in my mind for years, conditioning me to question my own place in the family. The thought made my blood boil, yet at the same time, it drove a relentless need to see the truth, to uncover what was real and what had been twisted by his schemes. Every day I imagined the moment the results would come, and every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, mind racing, feeling trapped in a limbo between fear and hope. I imagined 1,000 different scenarios, that the results might confirm Jason's claim, that all I had believed about my father, about my childhood, about my own identity, could be a lie, leaving me stranded in a reality I would never have anticipated. I pictured the crushing weight of rejection, the cold emptiness of discovering that the love I had known, the family I had cherished, was based on falsehoods and manipulation. And yet, there was a counterbalance to that fear, a stubborn flicker of hope that refused to die, whispering to me that Dad's love had been real, that Jason's jealousy and greed had led him to concoct the most audacious story imaginable. I tried to distract myself by keeping busy with work, by meeting friends, by revisiting old routines, but nothing could quiet the relentless churn of thoughts that kept me awake at night. The waiting became a torment, a mental battlefield where my mind alternated between dread and anticipation, each second feeling like an eternity. Then one afternoon the envelope arrived. It was simple, unassuming, ordinary in appearance, yet I knew in that instant that it carried the potential to change everything. My hands shook as I picked it up, the paper trembling beneath my fingers, the air around me thick with tension. I could hardly breathe as I carefully tore it open, trying to steady my racing heart, trying to summon the courage to face whatever truth it held. And then, there it was. The proof I had been longing for, the undeniable confirmation that I was, in fact, Dad's biological son. I stared at the results in disbelief, my eyes wide, my chest heaving as relief, shock, and a profound sense of vindication washed over me in waves so intense I could barely sit still. Every lie Jason had whispered, every doubt he had planted over the years, every attempt to diminish me, was about to be shattered in a way that could not be denied or reversed. My heart raced not only with relief but with a fierce, determined clarity. I knew that confrontation was inevitable, but this time it could not be fueled by impulse, anger, or rash words. I needed a strategy, a careful plan to expose Jason, to make him fully grasp the magnitude of his deceit, to show him that the truth could not be bent, hidden, or twisted for personal gain. The tension that had haunted me for weeks began to transform into a potent, focused energy, a drive to reclaim not just my rightful place, but the dignity and respect that had been threatened by his arrogance. I sat there for hours, absorbing the results, letting the realization sink in, and slowly, deliberately, I began to map out how I would bring the story full circle, how I would ensure that the web of lies Jason had spun would finally unravel before his very eyes, leaving nothing but the unvarnished truth to stand in its place. The more I thought about Jason and the chaos he had created, the clearer it became that shouting, threats, or emotional outbursts would only feed his arrogance and give him more ground to twist the story in his favor. I did not want to fall into his trap. Instead, I wanted a calm, calculated approach, one that would unravel him piece by piece without me raising my voice even once. So I began with what he never expected from me: silence mixed with strategy. I started documenting every single thing he had said or done since the day he claimed I wasn't part of the family. The smirks, the comments, the conversations he had with others when he thought I wasn't listening, the way he casually dropped hints about Dad's estate as if everything already belonged to him. I kept screenshots, notes, recordings of my own experiences, timestamps, anything that would silently build a mountain of truth against his pile of lies. At the same time, I began reaching out to old family friends and distant relatives, quietly and carefully, like someone piecing together a puzzle everyone else had forgotten about. I asked subtle questions, nothing that would spark suspicion, just enough to understand how deep Jason's manipulation had gone. The more I listened, the more I realized this wasn't a sudden burst of greed. This was something he had been preparing for years. People told me stories of how Jason had always been different after Mom died, more competitive, more jealous, almost obsessed with being Dad's favorite. Some even remembered moments when Jason would make odd comments about me not fitting in. Comments I had brushed off when I was younger but now saw for what they were: early attempts at rewriting the family narrative in his favor. Every person I spoke to added another layer to the truth. And with each conversation, my anger didn't explode, it sharpened. The more information I gathered, the calmer I became. It was strange but empowering. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like someone preparing for a quiet but devastating storm. And then came the moment I knew exactly what I needed to do. I decided I wouldn't confront Jason alone, not in a hallway, not in a living room, not in a place where he could twist the conversation or walk away pretending he had won. No, I wanted him cornered. I wanted him exposed in front of people who mattered: Dad's lawyer, who had handled every detail of the estate, and the family members who had begun to believe his version of the story, because he repeated it so confidently. I wanted a confrontation where lies would suffocate under the weight of undeniable truth. So I began preparing a folder, a quiet weapon disguised as paperwork. I placed the DNA report inside, sealed and certified. Then the notes from my lawyer explaining my legal rights, especially as Dad's biological son. Then copies of the estate instructions Dad had drafted years ago, the ones Jason conveniently ignored. Then everything I had documented: timelines, conversations, statements he had made. I didn't want rage. I wanted precision. I wanted a plan so flawless that even if Jason tried to run from the truth, he would find himself trapped in his own web. Jason had always thrived on chaos. He loved shouting, slamming doors, making scenes, twisting emotions. It gave him power. But this time I would not react. I would not yell. I would not match his energy. I would simply stand there with the truth, calm and unshakable, while watching his lies crumble around him. I imagined the moment the folder would be opened, the silence that would follow, the look on Jason's face when he realized he had walked straight into the downfall he built for someone else. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt in control, not just of the situation, but of myself. I was no longer the confused older brother trying to make sense of accusations. I was the man who would make sure every shadow Jason had cast over me was pulled back to reveal the truth. And so, with a steady breath and a clear mind, I prepared for the confrontation that would change everything. Not by force, not by anger, but by carefully placed truth that would leave Jason nowhere to run. The day was coming when he would face the very reality he had tried so hard to bury, and this time I would be the one controlling the narrative. The day finally arrived, a day I had imagined countless times in the quiet corners of my mind, a day that had been etched into every decision, every plan, every sleepless night I had endured since Jason had first dared to question my place in the family. We gathered in Dad's old study, the same room where he had spent hours planning, worrying and dreaming for all of us. It smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, a scent that always brought back memories of security and belonging, and yet today it felt like the setting of a reckoning. I placed the folder I had prepared carefully on the desk, straightening it with deliberate calm, and then looked at Jason. He was sitting across from me, confident, smirking as if the confrontation would end the way he had imagined countless times in his own mind, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes that only I noticed. I began slowly, methodically, calmly explaining the situation, recounting how his lies and manipulations had been uncovered, how every casual comment, every attempt to sow doubt over the years had been noted and documented. I laid out the DNA results first, handing the envelope to the lawyer for verification, knowing that nothing Jason could say would discredit science. The silence in the room grew heavier with every word I spoke. I detailed the evidence, the legal advice, the estate instructions, and finally the timeline of Jason's own machinations. I watched as his confident demeanor began to crumble. His eyes flickered, searching faces around the room for allies, for someone to rescue him from the trap he had so carelessly built for me. There was nothing. Every lie he had spun was now fully exposed, and the realization of it was written across his face, pale and tight with the weight of shame and fear. Family members stared at him in disbelief. Cousins leaned forward, jaws tight, eyes wide, as the smirk that had once seemed permanent on Jason's face disappeared entirely. Some whispered, some gasped, but none defended him. The lawyer explained calmly, backing up every point with documentation, explaining how the evidence confirmed my rightful place in the family and my legal entitlement to the estate. Jason opened his mouth to argue, to twist words, to attack, but I remained composed, calm as a lake in the early morning, unshaken by his desperate attempts. I realized in that moment that revenge did not need to be violent or loud. It did not need to involve yelling, threats, or chaos. Revenge, I understood, could be quiet, precise, and absolute. Watching him sit there, unable to respond, unable to manipulate, left me with a sense of satisfaction I had never imagined I could feel. It was justice served not by force but by truth, patience, and unwavering resolve. Jason tried, after a few moments, to regain control, to reassert his dominance, to make a final, desperate plea, but the room would not allow it. Everyone had seen the truth with their own eyes, heard it with their own ears, and understood the betrayal for what it was. The lawyer reiterated my rights, explaining how the estate would be fairly divided according to Dad's wishes and the undeniable DNA evidence. My cousins and relatives, who had been silent or uncertain moments before, now turned toward me with support, nodding, whispering words of encouragement, sharing in my relief. I felt a wave of emotion, strange and complex, a mixture of relief, satisfaction, vindication, and finally peace. The years of doubt, the shadows of betrayal that Jason had cast over my life, were lifted at last. And then in the quiet aftermath, I realized something important. It was not about the money, the inheritance, or the possessions Dad had left behind. None of that mattered as much as I had feared it would. What mattered was trust, family, and dignity. I had regained everything Jason had tried to steal, not through anger, confrontation, or bitterness, but through patience, careful planning, and the undeniable power of truth. I understood now that justice could be calm, that victory could be quiet, and that exposing lies with clarity and precision could heal wounds that rage never could. Sitting there in Dad's study, surrounded by the people who mattered, I finally felt whole again. And in that moment, I knew that no amount of deception could ever take away the truth, and no one could diminish the bond I had earned and preserved through patience and unwavering resolve. After the storm had passed and the echoes of confrontation had faded into the quiet corners of Dad's old study, I found myself alone, sitting in the chair he had always favored, the familiar scent of aged wood and leather filling the room. The weight of the past weeks, months, and even years seemed to press down on me in a way that was both heavy and strangely liberating. I leaned back, staring at the walls lined with books, photographs, and memories, allowing myself to finally breathe without the constant knot of tension in my chest. Everything that had happened, the lies, The manipulation, the betrayal, and the eventual revelation of truth unfolded again in my mind, like a long, painful film playing in slow motion. I thought about Jason, about the audacity of his claims, and about the hours I had spent replaying memories, wondering if I had misread the love and gestures that had been so consistent all my life. And I realized that life sometimes throws the worst tests at us, tests we are never prepared for, challenges that come from the people we trust the most, the people we believe would never betray us. Family, I understood painfully, could be both our greatest sanctuary and, sometimes, our deepest source of hurt. I reflected on how I had chosen to respond, how I had resisted the instinct to scream, to fight, or to lash out, and instead had embraced calm, patience, and the undeniable clarity of proof. It was not easy. There had been moments of anger so intense that it threatened to consume me, moments when doubt gnawed at the edges of my confidence, and I wondered if Jason's words could somehow be true. But choosing truth over emotion, evidence over assumption, and patience over impulsiveness had given me a sense of power I had never known. In that quiet reflection, I realized that my victory had been not just about reclaiming what was mine legally, but about reclaiming my own peace of mind, my own sense of identity, and my belief in the family bonds that had been manipulated but never fully broken. Jason eventually approached me in his own way, offering apologies that were clumsy, tentative, and revealing in their own right. I could see in his eyes a mixture of regret, embarrassment, and perhaps even a trace of shame. But I also understood that some wounds, once inflicted, could not be healed overnight. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a gift I gave him. It was a gift I gave myself. Holding on to anger or bitterness would have kept me tethered to the very chaos he had tried to create, whereas letting go allowed me to step forward with clarity, dignity, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing the truth would endure beyond any smirk or lie. Sitting there, alone in Dad's study, I understood something essential about strength. Strength is not measured by the ability to dominate or overpower others, to shout the loudest, or to bend circumstances to your favor through force or intimidation. True strength, I realized, is the ability to protect yourself, to safeguard your identity and your rights, and to navigate the storms of life with patience, foresight, and unshakable adherence to truth. It is the courage to wait, the resilience to endure uncertainty, and the wisdom to act decisively when the moment arrives. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that understanding settle deep inside me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely whole. The shadows of doubt that Jason had tried to cast over my life had dissipated, leaving behind clarity, dignity, and an enduring sense of peace. In that quiet reflection, surrounded by the legacy of a father who had always worked to protect and guide us, I finally understood that the battles worth fighting are not always the loudest or the most violent, but the ones waged with patience, intelligence, and unwavering faith in what is true. I want to share this story not to boast or to dwell on the pain, but so that anyone who has ever felt the sting of betrayal, whether from family, friends, or those they trusted most, can understand one essential truth. Reacting blindly, impulsively, or with uncontrolled anger only gives power to those who wish to deceive and manipulate you. Life has a way of testing us, of placing us in situations where our patience, wisdom, and clarity are challenged to their very limits. And it is in those moments that the way we respond defines not only the outcome, but who we become. I learned that gathering proof, staying calm, and carefully planning each step is more powerful than any loud confrontation or emotional outburst. Betrayal may wound deeply, leaving scars that ache for months or even years, but patience and discernment, paired with an unwavering commitment to the truth, have a way of exposing the liars and restoring balance in a way that anger never can. The truth is not just a weapon, it is a shield, a light that can cut through the darkness of deceit, and it has a persistence that nothing can erase. Through this journey, I also realized something profound about family. Family is not measured solely by blood. It is measured by loyalty, by love, by trust, and by the commitment to uphold those bonds even when the world or circumstances threat to pull them apart. When those bonds are tested, strained, or even broken, it is not vengeance or rage that restores them. It is honesty, courage, and the deliberate choice to confront falsehoods with integrity. I understood that the right path is rarely the easy one. It often requires patience, calculated action, and the strength to endure uncertainty while quietly preparing for the moment when truth will emerge. And when it does, as it inevitably will, it has a way of restoring justice, not just externally but within yourself, in your mind and heart, giving back the dignity and peace that betrayal tried to steal. So to anyone who listens to this story, remember your worth. Never let anyone, no matter how close they may claim to be, make you doubt it. Not even a brother, not even someone who smiles while plotting behind your back. Trust in the strength of patience, in the power of evidence, and in the inevitability of truth. Life has a way of revealing what is real, and justice, in its quiet and relentless way, will always find a path. Stand firm, hold your integrity, protect your identity, and allow truth to shine through the shadows of deception. In the end, it is not anger, revenge, or loud confrontation that leaves a lasting mark. It is calm, clarity, and the courage to act with both patience and wisdom that ensures your place in the world, your sense of self, and your right to justice remain intact. The liars may scheme, the manipulators may try, but truth is patient, unwavering, and always arrives at the right time, leaving nothing but clarity, dignity, and balance in its wake.